I never thought a shopping cart could be scary until the night the carts learned my name. I was 21, working as a night stalker at a Walmart 2 exits off the highway. We closed at midnight, but the building never seemed to sleep. HVAC hummed, freezers thrummed, fluorescent lights buzzed. An organism with slow, rhythmic breathing. My official job was to pull pallets and stock the back wall. After the graves of Stechina shoppers cleared, the store felt like a stage with all the furniture, waiting for actors. The large concrete lot was always quiet at my store. Mostly we had fast food, parking by day. By night, it was just the occasional truck and the kind of silence that sharpens sound. Your footsteps cling to it. In my second month, I learned the route. Clock in, check the floor for carts, lock the main doors, sweep the aisles for open merch, and start unloading the truck. That night the temperature had dropped and someone had left the automatic doors cracked open. No one wanted to deal with the headache of a busted air curtain. I told my supervisor, and he just shrugged. It'll close on its own, he said, went back, and to watching some late-night court show. At about 1:30 a.m., I was pushing the big blue barrels full of price-changed items down the sporting goods aisle when I heard a dull clang behind me, like metal on metal, but more hollow. I turned. There, against the end cap by the gym weights, was a cart. Nothing unusual. Carts were everywhere. But this one had been 2 aisles over when I left it. I'd take 1 cart to the truck and never have more than 3 in my path at a time. They had a way of migrating. This one looked untouched, the child seat cover still clean, receipts stuffed into the coin holder. The lock that clamps into the corral was swung open as if it had been released recently. It should have been an annoyance, not a moment. I chalked it up to wind or a slack employee. I grabbed the handle and steered it toward the return. 2 more clanks followed from the same direction. The sound had a hollow rhythm now, like someone rattling a chain slowly. I told myself. It was a freight cart sliding along the floor in the far aisle. The sports mats muffled footsteps. I walked toward the sound and found 3 more carts neatly lined up in a corner of the electronics department, each facing the same way toward the entrance doors. They weren't just scattered. Someone had arranged them like a small barricade. My stomach did a weird flip. I had been alone in that section for at least 30 minutes. I radioed the office. Hey, can you check the carts? I found a few away from the corral. The response was slow static and then one word, okay, from my supervisor, as if he was checking the channel between mouthfuls of something. I pushed the carts back toward the corral, feeling the rubber wheels click and glide over the linoleum. Each time I passed, I felt watched, as though the carts themselves had eyes. After I went back to the stockroom, I found my route messed up. Packages I'd stacked were knocked down. A pallet of light bulbs had been pushed into the middle of an aisle, blocking access, wrap riding like, with its plastic, a white flag. The shrink-wrapped pallet on the floor had that neat, ruthless geometry when someone with both time and intent rearranges things. On the CCTV that morning, everything looked fine. My shadow moving down the aisles, the doors closing, the janitor wheeling a trash bag, but the camera for the electronics aisle cut to static for 7 minutes. When the footage came back, the carts were lined up in the corner facing the door. No one entered or left on camera during that time. The footage was time-stamped 2:04 a.m. to 2:11 a.m. I told the assistant manager about the carts. He snorted and said, "We had rats, raccoons, maybe some kids came, sometimes drunks, back from the parking lot." He said, "Nothing to write home about." 2 nights later, the carts came back. This time there were 6. They sat like patient animals, arranged along the perimeter of the toy aisle, wheels clicking faintly, because when I approached, they followed the sound. It was barely a nudge, more of a mutual understanding. Yet when I opened my mouth, the air tasted like pennies. I pushed them back to the corral and chained them together. I tightened the chain as if I could pin down an idea. At 3:10 a.m., my radio crackled, and the display on the break room monitor lit up with a message I hadn't seen before. Return cart not found. Please retrieve. It was a routine message for internal cart count software, except none of the counts matched the carts out in the lot. The system was telling me there were 20 missing. We had 27 carts in the corral. The message repeated itself over and over in soft little beeps like a sewing machine. I called the night manager. He came out yawning with a half-eaten burrito in a foil wrapper. He didn't laugh when I showed him the saw vehicles in the lot. He looked right at them and his face tightened. Don't touch them, he said. Why? He glanced back toward the office, like someone expecting an order. We keep them out for inventory reasons. He didn't explain further. He told me to dump the pallet on the floor, unfurl the shrink, forget about, and the carts for now. Some nights, he said the corral, staring at, they move on their own. I thought he was joking until I saw the mall security footage from the parking lot. The cameras caught nothing at first. Empty asphalt, a single LED lamppost shivering with cold light. Then, like a film cut, the footage showed carts rolling slowly with no hand on a single handle, drifting from row to row across the lot. They moved like a slow wind, gliding over gravel and concrete with a suon rhythm as precise as clock hands. They came straight for the entrance and stopped about 20 feet away, as if someone had told them to hold. One by one they turned and bore down toward the Voix store. The timestamp read 3:08 a.m. By 3:09 a.m., the parking lot was full of carts, their silhouettes black against the lamplight, then empty again. The assistant manager froze the video, eyes wide. No human activity in the footage. No cars, no people. Just carts, rolling, forming, arranging. From then on, carts were never just carts, for me. I started waking up at 2 a.m., convinced I'd hear the wheels first. I put heavy things against my bedroom door, not because anything had followed me home that I could touch, but because I'd seen how patient they could be. The corral in the back of the store became like a small, unnatural mouth. Its rows and metal teeth waited for something to be returned. Sometimes, around 2 a.m. old woman, Anne would come through for the clearance items, or a delivery truck with a driver who smoked on his brakes. Their presence was a relief because they were living and noisy, and noise reassured me. One night I was cleaning up an aisle when the store lights winked, one section at a time, like eyelids closing and opening. The music over the PA cut to a thin, tinny loop of the thanks for shopping jingle. When the lights came back on, the carts in the corral were gone. There was only an imprint on the linoleum where their wheels had rested, a faint, oily shadow. I checked the lot. Nothing. The corral was open and empty, and yet the system told me 27 carts were accounted for. So, on paper they were in the building. On the cameras, for the next 20 minutes you could see them, a faint blur at the edge of footage, never fully in frame, like something the camera refused to look at directly. The supervisor called a maintenance meeting the next day. They insisted we count carts manually. We did. 27. Counted twice. Counted by 3 people. The manager signed the sheet with a smile that looked strained. I'll stock the carts myself tonight, I told him. I wanted to know where they went and why they kept moving, like something looking for an exit. That's not your job, he said flatly, but there was a softness at the edges of his voice That sounded like concern. I stayed, late. After everything was locked and the lights dimmed, I pushed the corral open. The lot was empty, white and unreal under sodium lamps. The air had that thin metallic smell that makes you think of old coins in hospitals. I stood there and waited. At 3:07 a.m., from the far end of the lot, I heard the hollow clatter. A single cart came, then six, then a slow procession out of the dark. They glided toward the entrance, silent but for the whisper of wheels. They stopped on the sidewalk like obedient dogs. From between them came a sound, not a voice. It wasn't language. It was something like a guttered exhale, like wind pushed through a throat. I stepped forward. The front cart rolled toward me until its handle was inches from my hands. Scratched into the plastic child seat area was a small, crude letter, my initials. My breath froze. I touched the plastic and felt the faint ridges of something, carved, recent, warm with friction. I looked at my hands as if the letters could rub off. Then every cart in the lot turned to face me. They all faced me. It wasn't a motion like a wheel turning. It felt like attention. I had the sense, stupid and animal, that they were waiting for me to acknowledge them. I could have run back in the doors. I did not. Instead, I whispered, "Who are you?" The plastic was cold under my fingers. The carts hummed like a throatful of metal. A sound rose from them, not a word, but a disharmonic whisper that vibrated through my molars. The carts then rolled back a single wheel width and stopped. They aligned again, pushed in neat little rows, and moved away in a procession that looked like it had left the building. When they reached the far end of the lot, they vanished into the dark like fog. The next morning, the corral held a single receipt folded into a small square. Inside were the words, "Return by dawn." After that night, no one told me to check the carts again. The manager started assigning overtime to other people. The cart software never complained again. Sometimes at 3:08 a.m., when the lot is empty and the lights are blue, I think about the way the carts formed their rows and the way they knew my initials. I think about patience and the way some things come back over and over until you do what they want. When I quit 6 weeks later, they told me it was for personal reasons. I never said why. If you ever work overnight at a place with carts and you push them toward the corral and they hesitate, if, when you look down, there's a name or initials carved where there weren't any before, don't assume a prank. Don't assume a raccoon. Be polite. Put a lock on the corral if you can. And when you go outside at night, say your name out loud. It can't hurt. My second story came from a woman named Rachel. She sent it in with her real name and a photo of the fluorescent lit break room she'd used for 5 years. She swore the watches on the wall stopped being accurate the night something began listening. Rachel worked customer service at a Walmart that also handled returns and layaway. Her job put her at the front of the store near the registers and the entrance, close enough to say hello to the regulars, far enough from the stockroom to see trouble coming. She worked evenings, and because she had kids, she traded morning shifts for nights so the father could get them to school. She liked the quiet hours. They helped her finish podcasts and unwind between transactions. Around 3 months into her job, the PA started acting up. It began with small things. A whisperage of static over the intercom that the overnight manager blamed on storm conditions. A delay in paging where the voice would cut out like someone inhaling mid-sentence. Customers complained that the music would stutter, employees said. Speakers in the floral department crackled like fire. Rachel noticed the patterns. When the store was busiest during Black Friday toy season, things were fine. The only problems came at 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock when the store hummed like a sleeping beast. The intercom would hum rhythmically, and sometimes someone would whisper a name into it. On the store end, then the whole system would catch and hold the whisper for a long while. It wasn't an echo. It was a repetition that happened in the pauses of the day. One night, she was counting back change at her window when the PA popped to life without the usual identification code. The voice that came through was quiet and a little distorted, like someone calling from the bottom of a well. It said, plainly but with heat, "Are you listening?" Customers around her looked up at the ceiling like people do when thunderstorms roll in and the sky seems to speak for a moment. The voice repeated, soft and insistent, "Are you listening?" She clicked the radio in her hand and paged the manager. He checked the control panel, muttered about electromagnetic interference. He told Rachel to ignore it. "Old wiring," he said. "It picks up whatever." He left it at that. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the voice in her head. It didn't sound like a person we met. It sounded like someone small talking to the wires themselves. The next night, the voice returned, but this time it named her Rachel. The name came like a punctured whisper. Her breath tightened. She tried to laugh it off as someone called the front desk. The registers picked up, the fluorescent lights hummed, but there was no one who would approach the counters. The automatic doors were empty. The store cameras showed the aisles like tidy rivers of merchandise. Rachel were here. She looked up at the ceiling, hands cold on the register. Over the speaker, the voice continued slow. "We're patient and right behind the glass. We are right behind the glass." "Who are we?" she said to the empty air. Customers gave her that look that says, "You're fine. I trust you." Her heart thudded. She radioed the head pharmacist. He was awake. He'd heard it too. He told her not to go into the break room alone. On the PA, there was a record of the page itself. System logs show what is transmitted through the public address system for liability reasons. After she insisted on checking, the log showed a plain line, unknown input, with a timestamp of 2:13 a.m. The audio file, when pulled a door in, had silence. The back room clicked. There were no voices. Yet every employee that hour swore they'd heard names, small phrases calling to them, and sometimes, like an old friend. The night manager, a man named Luis, began leaving the microphone on for long stretches. If it's feedback, I'll catch it, but he'd say sounded tired. One night, as Rachel clocked out, the speakers flashed with a long, low pitch. The voice threaded through in static, fragmented syllables like song notes. She recognized the rhythm. It was alphatic, sliding small sounds together. Then it spelled something. BRINGHER. The system stuttered letter, each sitting in the silence between overhead lights. When she put the headphones to the speaker, she could clearly hear. "Bring her." Rachel froze, the hairs on her arms prickling. Bring who? There were no dolls, no promotional mannequins, nothing that fit that pronoun. The crowd outside the automatic doors had thinned. A lone truck idled by the entrance like a patient animal. She walked the floor, headlight with a flashlight, the checking stock room, the manager's office, the flata, baby care aisle, anywhere you'd hide a person. No one. She brought it up with the night team, and they laughed in that brittle way of people who live on too little sleep. These stores are old. The wiring picks stuff up from the radio, old stadiums, CBs, phones. That's all. Yet several of them had their own stories about the PA, saying their names or calling out purchases from years past. One of the stalkers whispered that his brother had once found a voiceover, their system, that recited his late grandfather's favorite curse. Another said the PA once listed the exact items someone had stolen and the aisle where it was hidden, then turned off before anyone could act. Rachel started jotting down times. The messages came at night, precise as clocks. They rarely spoke full sentences. Most were fragments, names, verbs, check the light. Don't, small requests. Come home, go. The more she wrote, the better the pattern looked. Every time an item was set near the break room window, like a decorative glass jar or gift wrap, the PA would hum and the voice would whisper something about glass, about looking through wrong side, about the plastic. One night, while sweeping near the glass-fronted pharmacy, she heard the voice say, slow and deliberate, "She is in the glass." She thought it was an odd metaphor at first, maybe something about seeing herself in the storefront windows as a late-night employee. But then someone, an overnight contractor, came by with a set of keys and motioned toward the back. "You seeing stuff?" he asked. That's when they noticed something else. Condensation. The inside of the pharmacy window had a fogged spot at chest height, like someone had been leaning there and breathing. They wiped it. In the high bead of moisture the size of a dinner plate, the outline of a small handprint remained, tiny fingers splayed and pressed against the glass from the inside. No one could have been in the pharmacy's secured area. The lock showed no evidence of a breach. It was just there on the inside of the glass. The cameras didn't show anyone approaching the window. The log had a 30-second cutout at exactly 2:32 AM, like someone hitting the record button and pulling the tape. After that, people started leaving little things at the window during their breaks: gum wrappers, a crumpled receipt, a coffee lid. The PA would hum and sometimes ask for them back. Once, it spelled out letter by letter the name of a cashier's dead sister. He vomited in the break room and quit the job the next day. They replaced him with someone else who didn't stay past a week. Rachel's final night was the strangest one. She'd been at the counter counting cash. The store was nearly empty. A teenager came in and bought a single pack of gum, paid with exact change, and left. The registers printed the receipt. The PA was on, low and steady. Then in, a voice like wind through a vent, the system said, "She wants out?" Rachel looked up, palms slick. "Who?" she asked. A long pause. "Her hands are on the other side," the voice said. "She can't pull them back." Rachel stood up and walked to the pharmacy glass. The condensation had returned overnight, a shimmering circle of moisture in the pane's lower quarter. This time, the shape inside the fog looked like more than a hand. It was a pale, small face, pressed to the other side, eyes dull and huge. It wasn't quite a child, but not adult either, something in between if such a thing can exist. Her first instinct was to call for security. Her second was to run. She did neither. She propped her hand onto the glass and felt the tide of the store's air. The other side felt colder, as if someone had left a window ajar to winter. The PA breathed. She remembers names. It said softly. She calls them. "What does she want?" Rachel asked, because no one else was there to ask but the hum. Her voice felt small. The hum answered, "To be taken home." The store's front doors chimed. A man in a dark hoodie walked in. He looked like he was browsing, not buying into pockets. His hands shoved, was alone, tall, and he paused at the end of aisle 6 as if listening for a cue. Over the speaker, the voice called, "Bring him." The man in the hoodie looked up, as if summoned, and then, with a kind of slow surrender, he walked toward the pharmacy window. Rachel thought about intervening, about grabbing his sleeve, but something in the air, some low mechanical grief, made her feet heavy. He pressed his forehead to the glass. The condensation pulled away under, his face like ink in water. On the PA, static built into a low moan. The voice sang, an odd cadence, and people in the store, sleepwalking night employees, the lone contractor, turned their heads and listened. The man took off his hoodie. Tapping down his sleeve was a small band, a hospital ID. He whispered, something that made the contractor's jaw go slack. "You took her," he said, but his tone wasn't accusatory. It was pleading. In the break room, Rachel's hands shook. The speaker crackled into a line of names, not grocery lists or inventory. Names of missing persons. Children who had disappeared from the county over the last decade. The PA read them out, as if reciting dates for appointments. The contractor started to cry. The night manager grabbed the radio and cursed under his breath. The man at the window looked at the glass as if seeing a different version of the world, one beyond the pain. He pressed his hands to the glass, and the condensation flowed like skin, then slid down in runs, but no handprint formed. When he turned, his face was different, hollowed, eyes red. "We brought you out," he whispered. He broke off. The speakers filled with a sound like a recorded sob. Then the PA sponged up all the noise. For a minute, nothing in the store moved. The registers stopped humming, the fluorescent lights flickered, and the HVAC held its breath. When the sound returned, the man's face had gone slack. He slumped against the window. The security footage later showed him standing there, eyes fixed, like a man looking at a photograph. Then he walked out the doors and never came back. He was arrested 3 nights later, charged with something else, an assault on a friend or a burglary, depending on which report you read. He never spoke of the pharmacy window or the voice on the PA. The police checked the building's wiring and the tape logs. They found nothing odd, but in his car, investigators found a shoebox full of Polaroids, small white-framed images of kids, faded with time. In the last photo, almost out of focus, a shape pressed against glass. Rachel quit soon after. She moved across state lines and answered an online ad for a morning job at a quiet cafe. She said the store's PA still came alive sometimes, months after she left, retweeted messages on the night manager's private forum, people saying the speakers sounded like something from under a bed. But no one could ever play back the exact voice she heard. The audio files she pulled were always blank at the places the voice had spoken, as if whatever had spoken had been recorded somewhere beyond the physical channel. If you ever hear the PA at 3 in the morning and it calls your name, do me a favor. Don't press your face to the other side of the glass. The last story came from an old guy named Joe who had worked maintenance at a Walmart for close to 20 years. He had the kind of voice that carries better in stories than in angry customer conversations. Soft, with a gravelly reserve like someone who'd spent decades under hooded lights. Joe swore he'd seen more than a cart or a mist on a speaker. He'd seen a person who never took a day off. It started in the fall when the store took in a new brand of seasonal shelving, those tall steel end caps you could adjust on a wheeled base. The floor was a jungle for a week, with pallets, labels Joe was tasked with, and stray boxes anchoring the new units, bolting them to the ground, scuffing the paint so they didn't clink when the forklift brushed past. On his second night with the new fixtures, Joe noticed that the stock sheets didn't add up. Every night, there'd be one missing box from the closed inventory, a box of AAA batteries, a case of bottled water, a handful of garden gloves. Small things that were easy to misplace, but no one could find them. Joe chalked it to thieves or error until he started to find the boxes moved in. A pattern. They didn't look stolen. They seemed relocated, like someone had set them down carefully. The missing items always ended up behind the swa. New end caps, exactly 4 feet from a seam in the tile, back to back as if arranged for an audience. Sometimes the items were sealed and untouched. Other times they were open and their contents spread like a small scene. Batteries laid out in a circle, wires coiled into a spiral, water bottles lined up to make a tiny wall. One night, after the store closed, Joe stayed late to finish anchoring a wonky shelf. He could hear the store breathe, the mechanical, regulated breathing of flashing coolers and timers. He worked alone. The warehouse lights were dim at the end of the loading dock. The big garage doors hummed when they lifted and settled like the chest of something asleep. He was about to bolt the last anchor when he heard a soft, measured footstep behind him. He turned expecting a coworker and saw nothing but the reflection of fluorescent columns in the polished tile. Then the sound came again, only this time the cadence was wrong, too, even with a metronome, like someone pacing fixed at unnatural intervals. He followed the rhythm and found that it came from between 2 end caps near the hardware aisle. In the narrow passageway, a figure stood, a man in a reflective vest like the ones maintenance crew wore, with a clipboard tucked under his arm. He had a high visibility vest and a cap pulled low. His back was to Joe. "Evening," Joe said. The man didn't turn. "You lost?" Joe asked. The man's shoulders shifted minutely. "Inventory," the figure said, voice flat and rehearsed. Joe wasted a breath, wondering why someone would be in a vest with no name tag and no radio. He stepped closer, but the man's head was tilted in the other direction, watching the shelving like someone watching a work of art. Joe flipped on his flashlight. The beam caught the man's neck, there where tag or badge would be. The reflective striping on the vest was scuffed, but the fabric around it looked stretched, as if something had been forced beneath. Joe reached out and touched the clipboard. It was warm. The paper had names and numbers in neat columns, and at the top of the sheet, in a looping hand, the words counted. "Tonight" were written in black ink. "Been counting?" Joe asked, half to test him. "Yes," the man answered. "Always counting." Joe felt suddenly silly. People work nights and they wander around. He laughed. "Are you part of a temp team?" The man turned finally. He looked wrong. Not malformed, but precisely ordinary. His face had no lines, as if it had never been moved by laughter or grief. His eyes were a single gray mirror, and behind them, the fluorescent light seemed to fade, as if the man absorbed it. He smiled in a small, professional way. "I count," he said. "It's my job. I count till there, right?" Joe's radio crackled and an announcement blurted that the manager would be leaving in 10 minutes and not to forget to lock up. The man's head tilted slightly as if listening to the announcement in a physical way. "What do you do when it's wrong?" Joe asked, because he wanted to lighten the mood. The man's smile didn't change. "I'll fix it," he said. Joe nodded slowly and walked off. The figure went back to standing in his narrow lane, back to his counting. That week, inventory discrepancies persisted. Things were always a little off, items missing, items overcounted, corporate system always, prices misprinted. They adjusted the numbers by a neat margin in the middle of the night, like an unseen hand correcting an old ledger. One week, a new employee named Kara was scheduled for the night shift. She was young and precise, a barcoder by temperament. She took inventory seriously Numbers were a kind of religion to her. She asked Joe about the inventory man. He told her honestly what he'd seen. She laughed and said, "Cool, an urban legend to haunt the overnight. But legends have habits." A week later, Kara came to him shaking and pale. "He's been following me," she whispered. She said she found items on the floor in a precise grid near the store exit. She said she found her locker open and her notebooks rearranged in alphabetical order. She told Joe she'd woken to someone running a pen along the foreign edges of receipts, stacked in her bag. Joe called it a prank. He warned her to take someone to the manager. If it happened again, it happened again. Kara found the man in the aisle one afternoon near the Cool baby formula. He stood with a clipboard and a pen looking at the shelf. She walked up to him to ask why he was in a vest with no name, and he turned slowly. "Count?" he asked. Kara laughed nervously. "Yeah, sure. What are you counting?" He tapped his clipboard. The page had an odd list, names of employees followed by numbers. Her name was there, with the number 7 beside it. "7?" she asked. The man smiled. "7 nights," he said. 7 shifts. Kara's eyes narrowed. 7 what? He laid the clipboard in her hands and pointed at the number. The digits seemed to pulse a fraction. They weren't ink, but something denser, like dried resin. She felt a cold prick under her fingernails the moment she touched it. The number wasn't written. It had weight. "Finish," he said. "It's time." She slammed the clipboard down and ran. Kara called off her shifts. She quit 2 days later. She said things rubbed at her in the night, the sense of a pen tracing letters on her skin, the sound of clipboard paper rustling beneath her pillow. She moved in with a cousin and stopped answering calls. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Weeks later, the assistant manager found a neat stack of inventory lists tucked under the break room vending machine. They were printed in a neat, old-fashioned script. Each list was for a night shift, and at the bottom were names and timestamps, names of employees who had worked the Sizzle night, and a single time recorded, 3:09 a.m. for 15 nights straight. That time appeared next to the same names. Joe kept one of the sheets on his toolbox, folded, and when the night was quiet, he'd open it and stare at the ink. It seemed to change on slow geological timescales, the numbers sinking and shrinking, the edges of names eroding, returning with slightly different spellings. One stormy night, the store's alarm misfired, and the entire building went down for 22 minutes. The emergency lights came on with the odd dim orange that you see when municipal power blinks. People wandered in, the incomplete light looking like cutouts from printed photographs. The back door to the staff entrance had been left unlocked. Someone had propped it open earlier to bring in bulk. At 3:09 a.m., as the emergency generator sputtered to life and the store sagged in the false dawn, Joe saw the man again, this time at the end of an empty aisle, clipboard under his arm. The man was walking forward in a slow, stylized gait past, Joe noticed, and as he heretofore he had not. The man's shadow didn't match his stride. His silhouette lagged behind him and then fell forward into the shape of a person kneeling. Joe clocked the time on his phone. 3:09 a.m. He felt silly. Sudden synchrony makes even the bravest people nervous. He followed the man down an aisle of canned soup. The man's footsteps were whisper quiet. Joe's boots were heavy with rubber. When the man turned, Joe saw again that his face was a sort of blankness, an erasure of detail, but his eyes were sharp. "They don't want the numbers wrong," the man said. His voice had the flatness of someone who has recited the same instruction for many years. You know what happens when they're wrong. What happens? Joe asked, and realized his voice sounded like the wind through a grate. Man's hand moved, pinching a can from the shelf. He placed it on the ground and tapped it 3 times with the back of his fingers like a metronome. Each tap echoed, and with each tap, something in the aisle shifted. The lights dimmed a fraction. The HVAC oscillated. On the 3rd tap, the can exploded, not with sound, but with a slow unraveling. It fell apart into a pile of small, identical coins. They spilled like scales, and in their shine, Joe saw something. Tiny faces, but not human. They were smooth and rounded with tiny, careful features that repeated like a pattern. The man wrote something on his clipboard, and the coins arranged themselves into a small, neat square on the tile, as if obeying a call. Program. He looked up at Joe and smiled. They're safer when accounted for, he said. When numbers fit, there's order. When numbers fail, there's hunger. Who are you? Joe demanded. He asked because he needed words that might be recognized, like calling a name into a well. The man's mouth moved slowly. My job is inventory, he said. My job is to keep things in their proper place. Joe lunged and tried to grab the clipboard. The paper slipped through his hands like water. The man's arms were steady. He tapped the page 3 more times. The store's PA, always a weirder instrument at night, blinked to life, and the speakers spat a clover of static. When the static resolved, a voice read a list, names of employees, the numbers beside them. Joe listened and felt the digits crawl up his skin like ants. Beside his name was a tiny mark, 1 of 1. The man closed his eyes and, in a voice like a ledger, slamming shut, he said, "We're making room." Everything in Joe's head urged flight, but his feet were heavy. The emergency lights flickered out, and, for a breathless second, the store was a shallow cave of darkness. When the regular lights slotted back in, the man was gone. On the tile where the coins had been, there were only the small dents of where something had been set. Joe went home that night and slept in his truck in the lot. He stayed up all night recounting the inventory list in his head. When morning came, he looked under his bed and found a loose tile where previously there had been none. Under it was a neat square of coins much like those he had seen the night before, each stamped with a tiny face that was not really a face. He took the coins to the manager. The manager called corporate, who called a vendor, called who the manufacturer. Nothing in the chain could explain the coins. They cataloged them, sent them to a testing lab, and nothing came back. The coins were not metal as far as the machines could tell. They were just marks. The nights became harder after that. Employees left without notice. New ones signed on, unaware of the hands that had once arranged items in squares. Corporate did audits, and each audit ended with a small adjustment, a line in a ledger that read, "Correction, inventory outdated." Adjusting. The adjustment never printed a check, never arrived in a bank account. It just erased a thing, small and important to someone, as if the accounting had eaten it. Joe finally quit when a young man from the overnight stocking team called and said his brother had stopped answering his phone, and his apartment showed an extra person in the lease, someone who had always been listed as inventory. The boy's apartment had been in order, too tidy, like a staged scene. The police found nothing. The brother never returned calls. Before Joe left, he took one of the coins out of the lab's return box and wrapped it in tape and put it in a small wooden box he kept in his toolbox. Before he packed the box away, for the last time, he wrote across the top of the clipboard in thick black marker, counted, "Due not open. He left that note in the break room where someone would find it. He said goodbye to his coworkers and walked out into the sodium light of the Sarah parking lot. As he reached his truck, he turned once to look at the building. In the loading dock, by the row of new steel end caps, a figure in a vest stood with a clipboard. He did not wave. Months passed. Joe settled into a quieter life. Sometimes he'd wake at 3:09 a.m. and his lamp would be on. He'd check his truck bed and find, in the corner, a small white coin that hadn't been there the night before. He finally boxed the ball, rest, and drove out beyond town and buried it under an old cedar tree. The thing that worried Joe the most wasn't the coins, or the man in the vest, or even the way the PA lists names now. It was the feeling that inventory wasn't only about things. It was about order. And order, when enforced like a religion, has its own terrible appetite. If you work nights and someone hands you a clipboard at 3 in the morning, he told me over the phone, his voice thin with distant lights, don't take it. Just say, you're not scheduled. Walk away. Some things keep counting, and we're not always the ones who are counted.